The percolations are imminent. Okay, looks like a couple of 100,000 people are out there. Okay, I've got quite an interesting show today. Okay, if you don't know who I am Dave Nelson, and this is a Between Two Stoves show. I have the mighty JP Khoury on today for what I'm calling a carnivore cruise. This is brought to you by the Industry Cooking channel over there on YouTube. It's a fake homemade TV lifestyle channel, and I want you to go over and check out our companion site. It's where I do these live shows. It's Industry Cooking Community over on Facebook. You can kind of get on there, you can watch all my live shows, and you can learn and share with other chefs and like-minded food folk. You can just learn a ton of stuff and meet some really great people over there. So do go check it out, the Industry Cooking Community over on Facebook. Okay, let's see. I just want to say next Monday, September 21st on Industry Cooking, I'm getting a little funky with fungus, if you will. Okay, I'll be joining a longtime friend of the show, that East Sacramento Cookbook Club on Facebook. If you've never heard of it, it's really cool. And they're going to be doing a mushroom class next Monday. So in my show at 4 o'clock, I'm going to be going off with a little bit of a mushroom pasta or something, just to kind of get myself in the mood. Okay, and then later on I'll be attending that class. It's a mushroom class. Cool mushrooms are going to be showing up for this one. If you're interested, you should go over to the ESAC Cookbook Club, check them out, see if they have room in this class. It's going to be kind of a Zoom session, and I'm going to be there checking it out myself. That's next Monday. They're going to be running that like 7 o'clock, I think, or something. Okay, but for today, we've got a Between Two Stoves. This one is a carnivore cruise with JP Khoury. I should mention, trigger warning, this episode contains some straight talk about where baby cows come from, okay? But there's also going to be some discussion of the processes involved in cattle slaughter. So this content may be disturbing to listeners, okay? For those other folks that are interested in food, you're just food people, I urge you to check this out, okay? Folks might know that I worked for a very short time in a whole beast butcher shop, and so I tend to talk about naturally raised meats, you know, grass-fed and all of that stuff. But I wanted to kind of bring on the other side of that story. I wanted to talk about meats that are produced by large-scale operations. You know, sometimes that's the only option for a lot of people. Not everyone can afford the nice grass-fed, naturally raised stuff, right? And most people in the country, most of our carnivores, are getting their meats from this commodity meat industry. So I wanted to bring on Paul Khoury to provide some context to our viewers about large-scale commodity meat production. Now, as a consumer of flesh, I think it's important to understand what it takes to bring a steak all the way from ranch to table. And this little discussion is just an attempt to try and breach that a little bit, okay? So Paul Khoury, he is a longtime Sacramento area meat purveyor. You might know him around town if you're in the food business at all, okay? He is currently working as a center of plate, that's the meat, okay, center of plate specialist at US Foods, okay? This cat is known to darn near every chef in town, okay? He's also a longtime friend. We used to cook together back in the day, okay? There are a few people that I know with more general meat knowledge rolling around in their head, okay? And I really appreciate Brother JP coming on for this chat, okay? This interview is strictly educational. I do not want to infer any endorsement of brands, practices, lifestyles, whatever, okay? And so I'm gonna go ahead and bring the screen on up and let you guys take a look at JP Khoury doing a carnivore cruise. JP Khoury, my very good friend, I wanted to bring you in here and to talk about the process of raising meat in modern day America, okay? And so before I would get into that, I wanted to ask you to tell the nice people about yourself and talk about the kind of work that you've been doing in the Sacramento area here for the last, I think, 20 or so years, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, you and I crossed paths 30 years ago in 1990 as we both worked for the Hyatt. And we were like co-chefs in Dawson's for years, right? I had the nighttime, you had the daytime, and
Yes. Yeah.
we cooked together. What was nice about that is Masa pretty much gave us autonomy to do what we wanted to do in that dining room. Special times, right?
Yeah, he didn't want to mess with that. He
No,
he didn't want to get the car and let us run with it. Yeah, yeah.
Well, you know, after I left the Hyatt, it's interesting that I took kind of a low pressure job that I got really bored with, and an opportunity to be kind of a corporate chef and rep for a higher end meat company came along on a part-time basis that eventually grew into full-time, that eventually grew into its own life. And so for almost 14 years, I was corporate chef and sales rep for Preferred Meats out of the Bay Area. We did all farm to table, higher end stuff, real small company. And then I moved on the last almost 5 years, been with US Foods as a culinary specialist, again, with a focus on proteins, because I spent so many years doing that with Preferred Meats and learning just a lot from farmers and from the whole process. And you know, it's relatively simple and relatively complex at the same time. And there's a lot of controversy that people get involved in anything. I just kind of look at the whole process and say, well, you know, it is what it is. If you're going to do it this way, you kind of have to do it this way. If you're going to do it that way, there's drawbacks, there's advantages. This way, there's drawbacks, there's advantages. You know, sustainability can cover many different genres, and it's interesting how much misconception there is out there as well with things. And a lot of it has been marketing and labeling and packaging. You know, like uncured bacon. There's no such thing.
Right.
You know, you read the small print. It says, you know, no nitrites except what's found in celery powder, which is loaded with nitrites. It's
and harder to control and get right and all of that.
Yeah, and the thing
we are just going to go far afield here if I let you. Okay, so
that's
what
right.
I really want to do is stay kind of focused on.
Okay.
I wanted you to kind of be the guy to lay out that process of taking a baby cow or steer, we should say, right? Cow is
or a heifer that hasn't birthed.
Yeah, right. Right. Taking that from baby all the way to the plate, every step in between. And I thought, you know, again, without judgment, without anything like that, just straight dope on that process.
Well, and I'll give you what I know from my perspective and what I've seen. You know, I'm not a rancher, but I've worked with ranchers and I've seen the process, and you know how something ends up on a feedlot or goes straight off of grass into the processing. The dairy industry is huge for meat production as well. A lot of our fast food meats, our burgers, will come from old dairy cattle that are exhausted. They don't milk anymore, and so what are you going to do with them? You know, something has to be done.
These are exactly the types of things I want to talk about, right?
Because a lot of those end up, you know, going to grind for fast food. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not that it's unwholesome meat. It's just it's old. You know, it develops a certain flavor, a certain texture, certain characteristic. But you know, something needs to be done with that. So what do you do with that? As far as cow-calf operations, you know, for us to have dairy products, a cow has to get impregnated, give birth to produce milk. I mean, it's a mammal.
That's what I wanted to kind of start with at the beginning. And so I think we're all old enough for this conversation. Okay, so can you tell us, where do baby cows come from, JP? I literally want to start with every step of the process here.
It depends. Well, it has to start with a bull, right? So either you have the natural process or you have insemination. The same is true with pigs. You know, with a pig, they'll march a boar through that hog house. The sows will go into heat, and then they'll inseminate the sows. I mean,
they do it manually, huh? And modern, I'm talking modern industrial meat production. It's still kind of prevalent out there.
My understanding, I'm not up on every process of insemination, but you could think when you're talking about millions of
exhausted.
That's right. When you're talking about millions of pigs, you know, the efficiency that's needed. Smaller operations, a farmer may just have some boars and you'll have some sows, right? And
yeah, that's exactly.
Then you get what you get. Gestation period is a lot shorter for a pig than it is for cattle. And so, and then a sow is dropping anywhere from 9 to 15 piglets.
Yeah.
And they come to size in 5 months. Then you know why your pork chop is going to be less than a cow that drops one calf, and then that calf may become a beef cattle that takes 18 months to 2 years. And if it's grass-fed, it may go even longer to get that on your plate. Of course, the tonnage is greater, but you still don't have the same volume of production.
Well, we're still at the baby cow here.
Oh, we're giving back. You're steering me back. Okay.
I'm really going to reel you in.
What is this? What's this, Charlie Rose? What's going on here?
I got to say to the listeners, JP and I got on the phone the other day, and boy, wide-ranging conversation. We're going to go all over the road if I let you, okay? So
you start with the cow, okay?
You start with the calf, yeah. So
the calf. Now the calf in a dairy establishment, or if you're producing for dairy, then you're doing different cattle. Generally in this country,
again, we're talking steak.
You're talking steak. Okay, well, no, I'm going to go there because the dairy cattle is going to produce males and females. They're going to be either bull calves or they're going to be heifers, right? And that can be dairy cattle. Well, look, that heifer can become a cow once she's impregnated and starts to produce milk. But what are you going to do with the bull calf? The bull calf either becomes veal. They'll use that bull calf either to stud, and I don't know what the percentage is of those calves that make it into, the market for their semen, or it goes into a beef program. So a lot of times you will have, beef programs that are even choice programs that are basically drawing from dairy cattle. The conformation of the dairy cattle is a little bit different. The sizing is a little bit different. It can be very good eating as well. Generally, when we think,
let's talk about that. Like when people see a dairy cow and they see a beef, okay, what are like the differences? Because they're striking, right? They don't.
Well, they are striking. The conformation is different. The size of the animal is different, and the coloration is different as well. If you've seen a Chick-fil-A sign where you have the cow saying "Eat more chicken," that is a characterization of a Holstein.
That's a dairy cow. That's a dairy cow, typically.
Yeah, it's a heavy milk producer. It doesn't make the richest milk, but it beat just about any other cow as far as production. Right. And so that's what it's going to be, the black and white, those dairy breeds that really are raised for milk.
And looking at beef cattle, what are they typically looking like?
Well, if you Google an Angus. Yeah, if you Google an Angus or a Hereford is that the red cow with the white face. It has a little bit of a tuft. It's shorter, it's stockier, it's stubbier. Those British breeds were raised for meat. They were crossbred to be meat-eating animals. They lack the enzyme that metabolizes fat, so they tend to marble much more readily. They're not a double-muscled animal like a Chianini or a Belgian Blue or some of the continental breeds. They call them continental because they're off the continent of Europe. You've got, the Piedmontese and the Belgian Blue and some of these massive draft animals that are double-muscled. They would talk like Arnold if you have to talk to a moo.
Exactly.
Those animals can be very. Was that a good Schwarzenegger?
OJP.
If they're aged correctly, some of those double muscle animals could be very good eating, but they're much leaner. Your Angus, your Hereford, what they call the British breeds, the Shorthorn, these animals were crossbred for the table. They lack that metabolizing enzyme. They mature younger because their frame is smaller. So you have younger maturing with more readily marbling meat.
Right.
You've got more tender meat, more marbling, and you've got basically, this is your premium beef animal. Here in the United States, Angus was marketed really, really well. The black Angus, the red Angus is basically the same animal. It's just red. And so these animals birth easy. They through their crossbreeding in the United States, they become a little bit larger. They're great production animals. They're great meat animals. They grow quickly, so they're good for grass feeding. And so if you try to grass feed one of these large limousine animals from France or some of the continental breeds, as opposed to putting an Angus or a Hereford on grass, you're probably going to have better results with the Hereford or Angus. You won't get the weight,
right?
But you'll probably get better results. A rancher needs to make his money, right? So, or her money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you're looking at a yield, a weight ratio, the marketability. I mean, there's a lot of economics to go into that. So again, getting back to your original question, man, it's going to be a long show.
Do you see
back
me
to your original
over here,
question.
JP? Yeah. So
a beef animal will produce milk as well. It has to. It's suckling, it's young, but it's not. They're not bred for the Holsteins are not bred for meat production. It's a byproduct.
I guess really what I wanted is people are driving down the road and they see a dairy cow. It's kind of the black and white one. It's longer. Yep. It's bony. All of its energy
Yep.
goes into producing milk, not meat. You see the hip bones and the shoulders and all of that. When people are down the road and they see that beef cattle, it's usually like the red or brown, like you said, and yeah, they're stocky. You can see where the ribeye is and everything.
Yep.
You can see it. So,
and there's a lot of arguments that say, well, you know, I've eaten enough beef that I think I could tell the difference with good dairy cattle and good beef cattle. There's a lot of arguments going back and forth. You've got some European chefs that absolutely love the dairy cattle, you know, and we're so used to the marbling here. It's like people with Wagyu beef. They think it's just all about the marbling, and it's not. It's also the conformation of the muscle tissue, the nature of the fat. So I think we get too hung up on marbling and not just the eating qualities. And I've had some grass-fed beef that's rivaled Wagyu as far as just eating quality, even though the eating experience was completely different. So
okay, so the calf comes out of the mother. What are the first things that are kind of happening there? You see where I'm going?
I know where you're going with this. I'm going to have to start making stuff up because I'm not a dairy farmer. Okay. But look, they have to eventually wean the calf and get it away from the mother because the milk is going to production. So you have to do something with it. You can't just let them out to roam free. You have to protect them. Sometimes the protection of those animals in smaller areas are perceived to be very, very confining. A lot of times they will do that simply to keep the animal healthy and get it to the next stage of production of some sort, whatever it's going to turn out to be.
Okay, so
I find that
I kind of wanted to talk about this operation because as a meat eater, you know, I kind of saw this for the very first time. I never knew these operations existed where we're kind of housing beef cattle. So you mentioned, or I'm sorry, young cattle, right?
Young cattle.
You mentioned it's not safe on the farm. So can you kind of go a little bit more into this of why we are doing this? They're not staying with them.
Well,
I want to emphasize that.
I'll tell you what I know about it and the discussions I've had with people that do have cow-calf operations is you have to keep them healthy. You have to keep them safe from predators. And there's a good number of them. So there has to be a systematic way of being able to make sure they're hydrated and make sure that they have enough nutrients, things of that sort. So from just the passerby and the naked eye looking, they may say, oh, you have all these confined animals. Generally speaking, just about every farmer or rancher that I've spoken to cares quite a bit about their animals. They also know
that there's a significant dollar amount.
Well, that was my next point. Is it's also an investment. They're in the business of either producing milk or producing meat, which means for an added reason, you really have to care about your animals as well because it is a financial investment. But I haven't met anybody in my, and not to say that they may not be out there, I don't know, but just about everybody involved in animal husbandry, from whatever level, from grass feeding to you know, being on a feedlot.
So veterinarians.
Yes, have a real concern about the welfare of the animals. there's a connection with them. I know we've all seen horror stories and things of that sort, and not to say that those don't exist, but in general, what I know, people that I've met throughout the industry are decent people that care about their animals and also care about their families, and it's also their livelihood.
Yeah, I would agree.
So they're not pets. They're not pets. They are for production, but it's the last thing on the people's minds that I have interacted with to be abusive to animals. So.
Exactly. And I think that's a very good point. I really wanted to get that point out there. So that's why I wanted to talk about this operation, because again, I think very few people are aware of it, and it is part of it. And we want to be open and non-judgmental here and everything. If everybody's like wondering what it is we're talking about, you've probably seen them along the freeway where it looks like those dog igloo kennels, basically, I think, is what a lot of them look like. And so the young cattle are just kind of confined in there. But again, think about leaving that young calf on a dairy farm underfoot with its mother, where there's feces and bacteria, where this young animal doesn't have a fully developed immune system, right? And so it's done for all of these reasons. Veterinarians, the people that are investing money in these operations care about the animals. It's a necessary, I don't know if you even call it evil, but it looks bad, I think, in my opinion. Right.
Well, and I think a lot of these things have to do with certain things can look bad if you don't have an understanding of what's going on. I mean, if you popped into a surgery room and had no idea what was going on, and you see one person with a mask cutting open another human, you would freak out because you don't understand exactly what's happening, right?
Yeah.
So I think whatever call you make, whatever feeling you have about something, that at least should be an informed one. I mean, even if you decide, it's if I'm going to make a decision about something that's going to affect how I view it, it should be an informed decision and not something from a 5-minute YouTube video.
And this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation, because I'm not here to like give you a forum to spout the company line of the beef industry or anything like that. I just want to know the steps in the process. And I think you probably heard every meat question there is in Sacramento from every chef in town over the last few years or so.
Well, neutral. If anyone gets bent out of shape over anything like that, then I think it's their problem.
I think so too. I think that veal crating, that's just, I think if people saw that, they would flip out.
They would, just like with crating of a pig, and then you have this big old sow that really doesn't care, and she'll roll over half her piglets and crush them, and then lick her own poop. And I think we've seen Babe one too many times, or too many Disney movies, that you got to realize these are animals, and if you treat them the way they're meant to be treated, and you give them reasonable protection and room, then it's different. You would never cage a human like that, but you're going to make portraits.
They're not human. Do you know that German fellow? He's that doctor at UC Davis that talks about global warming a lot.
In fact, I sat in on 2 major lectures with him with the California Beef Council. He was very, very interesting. He's almost yeah. He's. And I remember bringing up Impossible Burger. What's that?
Yeah, he hates the red barn, the picture of the little red barn. And like you said, everybody's seen Babe one too many times. It reminded me of that guy.
No, that's right. And it's interesting because he really brought out, just the methane production, everything else with cattle, put it on a pie chart and everything else. And he basically said, you do the math. These are the numbers. What are they telling you? Which I thought was very interesting. I mean, the major problem isn't cattle. It's not cattle.
Well, we talked about it the other day, and I brought it up on the show. But now we're seeing more and more research about how migratory animals and cattle and range animals are helping the planet.
That's right.
Having less grassland is killing us.
I mean, even if you want to get into it, I don't know if you want to take a minute and get into the use of hormones in animals. There's so much misconception in that. I mean, we can go there if you want, or not.
I was going to ask about antibiotics and hormones. So, yeah, let's go ahead and jump into that.
Well, a lot of
they're actually, are they starting at this stage in the crating operations with all of that?
Well, I do know with hormone and beef production, and I've asked this question, the younger you start, it could affect the quality of the meat. So that's usually not started very young. But I will mention just hormones are only used in cattle. When you hear people saying, I'm not going to have any of those chickens loaded with hormones, there's no chickens loaded with hormones. No chickens get any hormones. It's against
what about lamb?
Pork either. Lamb is considered cattle, so they can, but my understanding is the vast majority, no one is giving hormones to lamb because they grow out so fast anyhow.
Yeah.
So the reason for
lambs up there.
Yeah, and the reason for hormones, the hormone is basically estrogen. It's a synthetic estrogen that actually helps with weight gain. And it's only administered very carefully during final stages. If they do it too young, it can affect the texture of the meat, from what I understand. But I asked about these things, and I was kind of blown away by the answer because I really thought I knew things that I did not know. Give you an example. The residual hormone in a pound of beef from an animal that has not received any implant or any tag or any hormones given is 5 nanograms per pound of meat. That's 5 billionths of a gram. It's like taking a paper clip and dividing it into a billion pieces and putting 5 of those pieces into a pound of meat.
So trace ounces is kind of what you're saying.
And it goes into your digestive system and all that. For an animal that's gotten a hormone implant, it's 7 nanograms. It's only 2 nanograms difference. If you eat tofu, it's millions of times more that amount. So if you're really concerned about hormones, maybe stay off the tofu. But the point is, now this cuts about 2 months of feeding off the animal, right? If you take, we slaughter about 650,000 cattle a week in the United States. If you cut 2 months of feeding off of each one of those animals, you could make an argument to say it's greener because there's not as much consumption. Of course, there's an economic advantage to something like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But how many people
greenhouse
know
gases as well? That
greenhouse gases. In fact, grass-fed animals put out more, evidently, than those finished on a feedlot because there's much more energy and gas in turning grass into protein than there is turning, grain. But that conversation can go on. And there's, of course, there's both sides.
They're all grass-fed for most of it anyway. So.
The point is, when I understood that about the hormone usage, for those that do get hormones, it changed my perspective on it. Because before I used to think, well, these animals are pumped full of hormones. No animals are pumped full of hormones. Even when they use it, it's under veterinary care. It's specific. I ask why synthetic, because it's much more controlled, and it's used for that purpose. When it comes to seeing labeling, like on chickens, no added hormones, it's like saying, we don't put pencil shavings in our ground beef. Yeah, but nobody does. But I'm telling you that we don't.
Yeah, see, and Mazola corn oil has no cholesterol.
Yeah. Well, now you have these gluten-free chickens, and it's like, to me, sometimes marketing can send the wrong message because it makes you really not understand the thing. Like MSG, it occurs naturally in anchovies and Parmesan, tomatoes and mushrooms. And so this whole no MSG added has become a marketing thing because people have become afraid of something that they don't know much about, but they think, hey, this must be bad because these guys are adding it and these guys are not. So,
and the opposite is true. They'll make health claims that are dubious and have people buying things. Oat bran was in everything for a while. And
absolutely. Yeah. So getting back to the cattle, it basically, the mother births, let's say it's going to be beef cattle on the range.
That's what I'm going to stick with. Beef cattle on the range. Otherwise, we just,
So you gives birth. Now what you're doing is you're getting the right bulls and the right inseminating, and depending on the size, you might just have the bull out there with the cow, and she gestates, gives birth. That animal is raised, and then it can go into a feedlot. They could sell it to, let's say, Cargill or IBP. It goes into a feedlot where it's finished. And once it's finished on grain, and it's not all straight grain. There's roughage, there's vitamins, there's minerals, there's fiber, there's all these things. Yeah.
And when you say roughage, it's like alfalfa and hay and
exactly.
Sorghum.
And they'll progressively get hotter with the feed. So that means they start with higher roughage and lower power, lower caloric, like lower energy, like corn. And then as the gut can take it, they increase to a higher energy feed to finish out, because you're trying to put weight and fat on that animal.
You're trying to bulk it up, and yeah.
How big? And then it goes to processing. That whole thing is, they stun the animal.
We're gonna get there. We're still in the feedlot. Yeah, we're still.
So now, if you see like a certain label, I'm not going to mention any labeling, but if you see certain Angus programs or certain farmer's name on a program,
I can mention a name, can't I?
Well, you can. I'll let you.
So most people, this feedlot that we're getting ready to talk about and everything, most people are familiar with around here are familiar with driving past Harris Ranch.
Yep.
So there's a name. That's kind of a really a smaller operation compared to some of them out there. But this is kind of what we're talking about. If you're
it's one of the largest in California, and they have different programs. They have an Angus program. They have some that utilize dairy cow. Look, Fresno is the largest dairy producing county in the United States. Those bull calves have to go someplace. You have to be able to process them. I don't know if they all go to Harris, but I know that is part of, and the manure goes back to the fields, because Fresno is one of the largest agricultural producing areas in the United States as well. So it's cyclical. So they end up there, they get finished out, and then they go into various programs. It may be an Angus program. It may just be, their private label. It could be a choice program. It could be a select program, because as they're graded out in the slaughterhouse.
So we're going to get there.
So we'll go there. So what'll happen is that, let's say a farmer says, hey, look, I'm going to form a cooperative, or a rancher says, I'm going to form a cooperative. We're going to have our own beef cattle. Then what they'll do is they'll put together certain protocols that brings either just themselves or other ranchers that they work with together and say, you've got to stick to these protocols. It's going to be under this label. Then they cut a deal with a slaughterhouse or with a feedlot or whatever to finish the cows to that protocol, and then take it to slaughter to that protocol under their labeling. But it still has to be all USDA inspected. It gets the stamp, not the wholesome stamp. They all get the wholesome stamp, but then it gets the roll. Either it gets the roll of select or choice or prime, or they decide not to grade it. It doesn't get the roll. So that's why it's called a no roll.
No roll, yeah.
Most people are not starting their own programs to turn out no roll beef. So there's,
And it's like you mentioned, I'm going to mention them again, Harris Ranch, a name that a lot of people around here know. They have their own name on their beef, and this is exactly what John Paul here is describing, right? A proprietary brand, right?
Yeah, and so, you got to look beyond sometimes labeling and say, okay, now what is this that I'm getting? Like, sometimes you will go into a grocery store and see the word select or choice on something, and then you realize, well, wait a minute, that's not the USDA choice label. That's their own brand that they've worked the word choice into. And so you've got to look for that stamp. And they all get the wholesome stamp, or it doesn't leave the slaughterhouse. But it's the grading now that becomes a thing that you pay extra for, but that the USDA has established guidelines for it. They're always adjusting and changing things. It used to be that it was about a 13-second call. they split the animal, they split the carcass right at the rib and the short loin, and looking at the conformation and looking at that fat composure and everything else, and knowing the age of the animal and all of that, they will grade it either select, choice, or prime. We've got more prime.
Looking right where the New York strip is right up against the ribeye. They're taking a look right where they split it and looking at the marbling. And
now, what's interesting, when that animal is warm, you can't see the marbling like you do when it's cold.
Oh,
so
that's
they asked about that. Yeah. And they said, well, there's more things involved. They'll look at fat cover. They'll look at the whole conformation. They'll see that meat, and an experienced eye can make a very accurate call. It's like an umpire calling a strike or a ball. You know, they're used to doing that.
Well, we're gonna get back to the grading because it's part of the production line, and we're just leaving the feed lot. So let's start talking about harvesting. Okay, the last and worst day that these animals have, as everyone says, right? The day they go to see the nice man. Okay, and so can you kind of talk about how that first step, the actual kill, the process of that stun, and then the exsanguination?
Well, you know, that's what Temple Grandin was involved in, making that process a lot more humane. And I met her a couple of times, and we've had conversation. And it's basically, you want to keep that animal comfortable. And the reason she could identify is because being autistic, she is very, very visual, like the animal is. So certain things that wouldn't spook a human would spook a bovine. And she was able to keep them calm and keep them through the process. So where they got to the point where they got stunned, and then, you know, and then they were gone, and then bled. Well, by the time they get bled out and everything, they're already gone. But the process of getting them there and getting them to that kill and moving on in more of a humane way was something she was involved in, and many feedlots and slaughterhouses that have started to implement those procedures. So,
you know, if anyone is really interested in learning more about this, it's a fascinating story. Temple Grandin, they made a movie about this gal. It's an HBO movie. What was it, Claire Danes, I think?
Claire Danes was in it. Yeah. Looks nothing like her, but it was Claire Danes.
Well, you know, yeah, I'm hoping they get somebody good looking to play me, you know. If that ever, you know, like a cross between a George Clooney and a Brad Pitt, maybe, or something. Definitely huge influence on modern meat production, facility design, and all.
Can I give you a quick story that she told me?
Absolutely.
These people at the feedlot could not get these cattle to move forward. They're having a trouble moving forward, and and everything. They just wouldn't move. They brought her in, and she looked around. She says, you got to cover up that slit in the fence. They go, what do you mean? She goes, light is coming through. The cow sees that light as a thing, and it's stopping because of the light, because it sees it as a thing, not just as light. And they thought, like, what are you talking about? So they cover up the slit. Cattle go right through.
Go right through.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff she does. She just travels around different operations and figures out how to make it work for them. And
absolutely,
she's famous for this. She goes all over the world figuring things out.
And she's worked everything from with fast food operations to farm to table to grass fed. She's worked with all of it. And she said, when I asked her if she has a preference, she says, look, whatever you're doing, just do it the right way.
Yeah.
So if you're going to grass feed the animal, do it the right way. If you're going to corn finish, do it the right way. Slaughter them the right way. That was the whole point, being humane towards the animal through the process. She was fascinating. Very, very interesting to talk about.
The story's fascinating. Do check out the movie if you haven't seen it, folks. Let's get back to that slaughter. So you mentioned the stun. Now, all that does is knock them out. You see them, you hear about the bolt gun and everything.
Well, and it goes into it goes into the brain, and they're basically brain dead, and then they're hung up and then bled out. The USDA, you have to bleed out the animal. And then after the bleed out comes the evisceration and the skinning. And then it goes into cold storage, and it has to go through Rigor. It's the Rigor Mortis that where now you have the glycogen that's in the animal's body starts to denature, And if there is not enough acidity, then you get the dark cutter. That's why you don't want to spook an animal before it goes in, because it uses up that glycogen in a panic, and the adrenaline comes out. And then when it's slaughtered, you don't have the glycogen and the other things in the system that are needed for it to go through rigor properly and have good quality meat. Same is true if you have a hunter that spooks a deer and chases it down and everything else. Generally, the venison isn't going to be very good.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with that idea. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting now is they do electroshock. Not to the live animal. They do electroshock to do like an instant rigor mortis. What'll happen is it goes through an electric field that makes rigor mortis happen, within a few minutes instead of hours. And it has to do with implementing electricity in that and making the process go faster. Many say it makes the meat more tender. I mean, there's a huge amount of science behind it. Because now you're talking about a living animal that now is tissue that's going to be eaten, but you have that, and I hate to say it, it's this controlled decomposition of that tissue that makes the quality of our eating experience either good or not so good.
That's exactly what it is, and that's what we want. And about back in the old days, they would actually hang game birds for quite a long time, and we ate
absolutely.
It's all controlled decomposition, and believe me, nobody wants to really eat that steak fresh off of the beast same day.
No.
We want that.
And if you're going to eat it right away, it better be right away, because if rigor sets in, you're going to have some issues.
So at the end, they're getting that carcass hanging. This is when the stamp gets rolled down the carcass, correct?
Yeah, this is when it's rolled down the line. They evaluate it and they'll stamp it for wholesomeness and for grading, if it's going to be a graded program, which most of it is.
Can you talk about those who do the inspection?
The USDA, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about them other than that they're trained by the USDA. You have to have a USDA person on duty in any slaughterhouse or even any meat plant where they're doing any cutting, or else that operation shuts down. You could run the business, you could take boxes in and out, but you cannot have that cutting room or that slaughterhouse floor operating without a USDA oversight there. And sometimes you hear complaints about them, but look, these guys work hard to keep everything safe and wholesome and to standard, from E. coli testing that goes into beef grinding programs to, a lot of times you look at even people that are grinding in house, you really got to know what you're doing if you're going to grind in house, not only from the temperature, but the meat that gets ground actually goes through E. coli testing to make it more safe for ground meat. And they still tell you cook it to 160, just to be safe. To me, everyone takes their own risk on it. If I know where the meat's coming from and I know the program and I know how it's ground, I have no problem eating a medium rare burger. If I got to be completely safe about something, then you cook it well done. But generally speaking, if things are done the right way, the risk is fairly low.
Okay. And I think you just barely touched on inspection for just one moment. Can you kind of just flesh out the difference between inspection and grading? Because you were talking about grading a little bit.
Inspection just says that it's wholesome. It's not going to kill you if you eat it, So grading is like, okay, now what is the quality of this animal?
Thank you.
Like the cow programs that go into fast food, none of that meat's getting graded. It's old cow meat. Why would you spend extra money to know that you're getting utility meat? Yeah. You're telling me something I already know, and I wasn't raising this animal for that. And so it is what it is. With people that are raising cattle for beef, first of all, they want the highest quality possible. And two, they want to be able to make their money on it. So look, if your animal is grading out prime, why sell it as choice, or why sell it as no roll? And people say, well, this meat wasn't worth grading. I guess it must not be any good.
Right.
Sometimes we get what they call number twos, which is basically somebody on the kill line or the when they're breaking down the subprimals might put a blade like through a ribeye or something, and
Sure.
you get and we've had number twos that come in that are close to Wagyu in marbling, and they get sold off for no roll pricing.
Right.
You know, and you know you really hit the bank on something like that, but it's few and far between. So you're not going to say, well, oh, you know, that last no roll was great. Just send me the no roll. And the next round is like, this is not what I expected.
Circus animal or something.
Absolutely. So, and usually no roll product is different than ungraded meat. When you're talking about ungraded meat, you're basically talking about a program that they didn't intend to grade it at all. It wasn't raised for beef. It was a byproduct of dairy, old cows, whatever. Then you have no roll, which basically is coming out of a graded program that for one reason or another, they decided not to grade that meat. And it's generally beef cow. Then you could go all the way down to utility meat. And these come from very old animals, and they end up in, you know, in the cans of beef soup and things of that sort.
Eating more beef stew and
yeah. And that's why when you're eating certain processed food or certain fast food, just the flavor of the meat itself, you're thinking that's different. And usually it comes from older animals, which is fine. You know, it is what it is. You get some grass-fed Argentinian beef, and some of these animals are older. Well, it is what it is. You know.
Yeah. So so we got to the end of the kill floor, I think, right? And the carcasses are hanging. What's kind of the next step? Because it's not ready for my table. It's still a carcass. I've seen production floors. Can you kind of talk about what those look like a little bit?
Well, I want to talk about Eric Miller's production floor, because now he's breaking down carcass. He used to work there, and he does a phenomenal job. You guys all did a great job. But when you're looking at it in production, you basically have a line that now is splitting the carcass. That's why we have the NAMP guide. Let me see, I got one here. Let me see if I can show it. And you may be familiar with this. North American Meat Processors, NAMP. I think now they call it NAMI for some reason. I don't know. Oh man, green screen. Where's the green screen?
I think the green screen's killing it, but yeah, you mentioned it. I pulled it out in a show not too long ago.
Yeah, and what it does is it systematizes the cuts. So if you're ordering a 109 export rib, it's not 7 bones one time, 3 bones the next, big old fat cap, the bones are too long. You're basically systematizing how you're breaking down that animal for American usage, because the French break it down into much smaller portions. And then they do that on the line. These butchers are trained to cut 109s and to cut strip loins and porterhouses and split the bones and pull out the tenderloins and all of that, and then they package them. Give you a good example of the system there. One time I got called in where a customer says, hey, I opened this box of tri-tip and there was this. And he didn't know, but when he held it up, it was all flap meat. It was bavette.
Oh,
yeah. Well, the bavette and the tri-tip both come off the bottom sirloin. And what ended up happening is they threw the tri-tip into the bavette box and the bavette into a tri-tip.
Sure. I bet that happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, especially now when you have real labor issues, then it becomes harder and harder. And sometimes you see some inconsistencies that you try to nip in the bud. But now these are numbers. Packing date goes on the box. You have the cut that goes on the box. They're cryovac and sanitized, and you basically have a very wholesome operation when you're talking about the slaughter of a lot of animals. You know, you really have to have things in place, or else you can have some real issues.
There is some unpleasantness along the line, but I'll just kind of say it, visiting the slaughterhouses, I was fascinated with how they kept the feces and the meat separate, right?
Absolutely.
They kind of clamp it off at both ends, and then take everything out. And so everything, that bacteria just stays completely away from the meat. They, one of the places I was at, I saw a big place, I saw a small place.
Yeah.
The big place, they had like a car wash, basically.
Yeah.
You know, white out of the kill floor, washed them off. There's cow poop everywhere, right?
There is. They're cows.
They do a lot of work keeping that all separate from
Absolutely.
the product. Yeah, it was fascinating stuff.
What's interesting too is they'll go into that eviscerated carcass and they'll blast it and clean it out. You know, I think that's why sometimes if you get hanger steak, sometimes it looks like the outside has been blanched a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with that cleaning and then how they cryovac in the heat packing. But that hanger just hangs right in the diaphragm area, and it's kind of exposed. So it's interesting too to see these cuts coming off an entire carcass, and it helps you to appreciate, even the type of method of cooking. Hey, this muscle moved that animal for 2 years back and forth. It's going to eat or cook up a lot differently than this suspension muscle.
This is why I think breaking a lamb down in front of somebody, it just makes so much sense. It just why I cook this the way I cook it. It really.
And you bring up a very good point that the anatomy of a lamb and a beef cattle are almost exact, except the lamb is a lot smaller. It's a lot smaller, right?
And all the way down to a rabbit, right?
All the way down to a rabbit or a pig. This is an interesting one. When you're looking at the center cut pork loin, it's basically the New York and the New York strip and the ribeye put together off of the steer.
Yeah.
But it's broken down that way on a steer because can you imagine like a 75-pound piece of meat or, you break it down into much smaller sections, whereas a pig, you could take the whole thing. So
that's where the parts go off. I mean, the production floor, that's kind of where our story ends right there. Basically, they're just going off to market and going to people's plates, restaurants, you name it, right?
Absolutely. And so you have like Angus programs, you have all these different programs that these slaughterhouses and companies associated with them, whether it be IBP or Cargill or even some of the smaller ones, you have Creekstone and you have even much smaller ones that may go through these slaughterhouses, but this ranch program says you're putting my name on that,
right?
But it still goes through the same process. It has to.
Yeah.
Even grass-fed animals have to go to a slaughterhouse to get processed, or this guy drives up in his mobile slaughterhouse. But there still has to be some sanitation and USDA guidelines when doing that. If you're going to sell the meat,
sell the meat, yeah. So we're kind of at that last stage, that processing facility, and I kind of want to bring it up because in the early days of COVID, we had those outbreaks at the meat processing facilities. Right. Was I correct to assume that most of that occurred kind of on that main production floor? Not really, because when I toured the place I toured, the kill floor seemed like everyone's spaced out, but the production floor looked like somebody kicked over an anthill. There were people everywhere.
I really can't speak authoritatively on that, but I would imagine whenever there's the closer proximity and those colder temperatures, you're going to have that. That's why during COVID, especially now, we're starting to get out of that, and I'm constantly looking at what's available for my work. But you don't have you had a problem with further processed products, so it was much easier to get a bone-in pork butt than it is to get a boneless pork butt because you just didn't have the labor. You're making carnitas, what does it matter? You just pull that bone out when it's done, But I had to put things together and show people this is how you take that bone out. Because if you're using a boneless pork butt, you may never have to deal with that shoulder bone before. And now you may have to. So it's understanding what you have to work with and then making do. But the processing is starting to get back online and more is coming through the pipe. What happens with, it's like this massive train and then the front engine slams on its brakes. There's going to be cars popping off the track.
Yeah. So that must have kind of affected you guys as far as supply and all of that. You must have felt a little pinch there.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I think everybody did, and so you have to kind of work with it. I think both from the production end, the distribution end, even the restaurant end, and there has to be the ability to be flexible because it was unprecedented, right? And then your heart goes out to those, restaurants that had to close, some for good, some just temporarily. These are livelihoods of people. And that goes all the way down the line from the distribution all the way down to the rancher,
I was just going to say, all of those middlemen and all the way down. Yeah, all the way back.
There's more prime beef now than there has ever been because they've had to keep animals on the feedlot for an extra 100 days or more because the slaughterhouses were closed. So now it's a great time to buy prime beef. But you can't get a small ribeye anymore. I mean, ribeyes have become very, very large. So, yeah, so that becomes a problem now when a chef wants to put a piece of prime rib on the plate that, will tip over Fred Flintstone's car. Did I say that? Fred Flintstone's car. The old cartoon. How do you find a solution to, you're not going to find the smaller eyes as readily, so you just have to go about it differently, probably,
Yeah, you're just going to have this poor little thin, steak white that's hanging off the edges of the plate.
Absolutely, or split the eye, just work with the eye, do the spinalis for something else, take the tail, do something with it, but you got to make economic sense out of it as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Dude, you are that took us pretty much to the end, right?
Is this done?
We've taken it from baby cow, baby heifer, all the way through to kind of sending it off to market and everything. It was great stuff.
The same is true with lambs and pigs. Chickens are a lot quicker. They're only about 12 weeks old or less. Some are even 7 or 8 weeks. But it's the same process from hatching or birth to the time you use it either for milk or for food. There's these stages it goes through. And the more we know about these things, I think better decisions we can make on it. So
this is why I wanted to bring you on. It's just so educational, right? And again, we're not. There's no judgment here. We're just laying it on out.
Just laying it on the table, right?
Just a couple of guys hanging out.
A couple of guys.
Dude, you're a chef, man. You're kind of a badass hog. I'm gonna say it. Okay, you're a badass chef. Okay, what are you cooking these days?
You know what? I'm doing a lot with secondary cuts of meat.
I like that. I like it.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of sous vide. I know Eric Miller. Shout out to Eric Miller because we always go back and forth on that. It's all in fun.
He loves the sous vide.
What I have been doing is just seeing, how time and temperature. I think the thing that I did recently that I really, really enjoyed was taking a big, thick, almost cowboy thick pork steak off of the shoulder, cryovacking it and sous videing it for about 8 hours at 135 degrees, and then searing it like I would do a ribeye and slicing it. Just phenomenal. And just salt and pepper. Just salt and pepper.
Everybody's talking about that shoulder steak these days. They really are. You think it's a slow cook item, but you can go out there and just kind of, people are throwing it on the grill and just chowing down. It's so good.
Absolutely. It's time and temperature. And you know what? And even conventionally, my favorite way to roast a chicken now is to get that bird in the oven at about 220 degrees for about 3 hours. Oh, wow. Pull it out, crank that oven to 500 and blast it for 15 minutes. And I get a perfectly roasted chicken. A lot of people say, well, the Thomas Keller method, which is great, with 1 hour at about 400 degrees. Yeah. Again, it's time and temperature control, and you can have good results with multiple techniques. It's just really fun to do. I'm playing a lot with hydrocolloids and some of the foams and stabilizers and stuff. That just fascinates me. How to take it and apply it to old school type of preparations, like stabilizing a beurre blanc or a hollandaise and not necessarily making a spear of mango or whatever.
Hey, remember the olive oil béarnaise back in the day?
That's right. The sauce Tyrolean, right? Tyrolean, was it?
Yeah. Old school.
That was it. I love that sauce, man. I love that sauce.
Yeah, I'll still do it once in a while, and I tell students about it too. Yeah, because you can do it cold, you can do it hot, whatever you want.
That's right. Now, what's interesting is with methyl cellulose, the F50, you could do a cold hollandaise that won't break because of that plant-based fiber that's in there. And so to me, that's very, very cool because now you're approaching that old olive oil hollandaise, but you're using new techniques to get the same result. And to me, it's just fun. It's just fun.
You got Matt's kitchen skills. Maybe someday you're going to come back on the show and throw down a little kitchen wisdom. for our legions of listeners. What do you think?
Do some cooking together. That'd be fun, Dave.
Yeah, between two stoves. That's what
Between
this is.
two stoves.
We should do it. All right, man. Well, I think we just had ourselves an interview, and so we'll just call it a day. And again, I want to thank you so much for laying it on down. Okay, I think I chose the right guy to talk about this stuff. A couple times I just stopped and I was just smiling, just like.
Well, you have to if you get me going, you know. But it's always a pleasure talking with you, Dave. Had great fun for almost 10 years working with you, and can't wait to get back together again. So.
Right on. We're going to do it. You've got the great radio voice. I have to bring you back.
Right here with Chef David.
That's right. Well, all right, brother. Thanks a lot. And we'll see you next time. All right.
Thanks, Chef.
All right. Okay, folks. So that was the great J.P. Khoury, really good friend of mine. You can probably tell that, hey, we've known each other. We go way back. And so we're pretty comfortable. We have a lot of fun together. So that was a long one, okay? But it was gold. It was solid gold, I thought, okay? I want to remind everyone that you were watching Between Two Stoves just then. I'm doing these little interviews with local Sacramento food folks, hey, maybe other food folks, right? Maybe somebody from out of town once in a while, right? But I'm doing them every Thursday at 4 p.m. on Facebook Live. These are bootleg interviews with chefs, bakers, butchers, farmers, and others on the front lines of our local food industry struggle to survive. Check it out. We'll share stories about how the hospitality world still manages to provide sustenance to the people during this ongoing season of Corona. I also want you to join me every Monday at 4 o'clock on Facebook Live for Industry Cooking Happy Hour, okay? Formerly Quarantine Kitchen Happy Hour, okay? I'm still happy, but I had to change the name, okay? These are gonna be food talks, one word, okay? We're gonna pick a technique like roasting or risotto, and we dissect it, and along the way, we give backstory on things like ingredient knowledge and knife skills and ratios and flame control and flavor development and anything else that just comes down the pike while we're cooking in the kitchen and hanging out, okay? So these shows distill decades of kitchen wisdom into tasty, bite-sized bites that you just won't see on any other show out there, okay? And so to watch live, check out Industry Cooking Community at Facebook. You can interact and play along with other like-minded food folk over there. And I also want you to go over to check out Industry Cooking channel on YouTube, okay? I got all my videos up there. There's tons of cooking videos and there's tons of interviews with great Sacramento chefs and food people, okay? So I think that's all I got. That was a super long one, okay? I want to thank Paul Khoury, the meat dude, okay, for bringing us along for the Carnivore cruise, as I was calling it, okay? I just want to remind everybody to be true to your food, and you will always be eating real. And don't forget that the party is always in the kitchen. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have today. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a little bit. Class is dismissed.